The wind howled like 1,000 tortured spirits across the frozen wasteland, and in the midst of that white hell stood Anya Sokolov, 90 years old, wrapped in layers of reindeer hide, facing down a wall of yellow eyes that gleamed with ancient hunger. Behind her, 23 bison huddled together, their breath creating clouds of steam that froze instantly in the negative 71 degrees Celsius air. This was not where most people would choose to spend their final years, but Anya had never been most people, and what happened on that February night in the Sakha Republic would prove that the human spirit burns hottest when everything else has frozen solid. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the oldest among us carry the fiercest flames. And if this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because these are the stories that remind us what we're truly capable of when everything is on the line. Anya's hands, gnarled and spotted with age, gripped the long staff she'd carved from birchwood 40 years ago. The wolves were advancing slowly, cautiously, their massive paws barely making a sound on the wind-packed snow. She counted them, her eyes still sharp despite her age. 1017, she thought, though the number seemed impossible even to her. They'd been gathering for 3 days, drawn by the scent of the bison herd that represented the last hope for repopulating the species in this remote corner of Yakutia. The research station was 40 kilometers away, and the radio had died 2 days ago when the batteries froze and cracked. There would be no rescue, no helicopter descending from the sky like something out of a fairy tale. There was only her, the bison, and the wolves, and the terrible mathematics of survival. She thought of her granddaughter Katya, who'd begged her not to take this assignment. "Babushka," she'd said, tears in her eyes, "you're 90 years old. Let someone younger go. Let someone stronger go." But Anya had smiled and touched Katya's cheek with a weathered hand. "I have lived through the siege of Leningrad," she'd said softly. "I have buried 3 husbands and 4 children. I have survived the collapse of empires and the birth of new worlds. These bison need someone who understands that survival is not about strength, it's about stubbornness, and nobody is more stubborn than a 90-year-old woman who has decided she isn't finished yet." Katya had laughed through her tears, but the worry never left her eyes. Now, standing in the coldest place on earth, facing death in its most primal form, Anya wondered if her granddaughter had been right. The lead wolf, a massive gray beast with a scar running down its flank, took another step forward. Anya could see its ribs showing through its fur. This wasn't a hunt born of cruelty or sport. These wolves were starving, driven south by a winter that had been brutal even by Yakutian standards. The reindeer herds had moved early, the hares had gone deep into their burrows, and the wolves had nothing left to eat. In their yellow eyes, Anya saw not evil but desperation, and that made them infinitely more dangerous. A cruel predator might be dissuaded, might find easier prey, but a desperate one would fight until its last breath. She understood this because she had been desperate herself, many times, and she knew what it made people capable of. "Go back," she shouted in Yakut, her voice cracking in the cold. "Find other prey. These animals are not for you." Her words vanished into the wind almost before they left her mouth. The wolves continued their advance, spreading out now, trying to encircle the bison herd. Anya moved with them, positioning herself always between the predators and their intended prey. Her staff struck the ice with sharp cracks, and she began to sing, an old Yakutian song her grandmother had taught her, about the spirits of the taiga and the respect owed to all living things. The wolves paused, perhaps confused by this strange, small creature that refused to flee, that made noise and moved with such deliberate confidence despite being so clearly outmatched. The bison behind her were bellowing now, the calves calling for their mothers, the bulls stamping their hooves and lowering their massive heads. They were weak from the journey, from the cold, from the lack of proper grazing. The research team had been moving them to a new protected zone where ancient grasslands still survived beneath the snow, where they might thrive and multiply and bring their species back from the edge of extinction. 3 months of careful planning, 2 months of slow migration, all of it about to end in blood and snow because nature didn't care about human timelines or conservation efforts or the dreams of an old woman who'd spent her last years trying to give something back to the world. Anya's mind drifted, just for a moment, to 1943, to the frozen streets of Leningrad where she'd been a girl of 7. She remembered the hunger that had felt like it would consume her from the inside, remembered watching people fall in the street and not get up, remembered her mother breaking her own rations in half to keep her children alive. She remembered the German soldiers surrounding the city, remembered feeling like the walls were closing in, like there was no escape and no hope. But they had survived. Against all odds, against all logic, they had survived because her mother had refused to give up, had found food where there was none, had kept them warm when there was no fuel, had told them stories to keep their spirits alive when the cold wanted to freeze their hearts solid. The wolves were circling now, and Anya knew she couldn't cover all the angles. She made a decision born of pure instinct and decades of surviving in impossible situations. She drove her staff into the snow and began pulling things from her pack. The emergency flares she'd been saving for when the rescue team arrived. The small bottle of kerosene she used for her lamp. The precious matches wrapped in waterproof cloth. Her hands shook, not from fear but from cold so intense it had penetrated every layer of clothing, every inch of skin. She struck a flare, and it burst to life with a hiss and a brilliant red glow that seemed to tear a hole in the darkness. The wolves nearest to her jumped back, startled by the sudden light and heat. She planted the flare in the snow and lit another, then another, creating a half circle of blazing red light between herself and the advancing pack. The wolves stopped, confused, their predatory instincts warring with their natural fear of fire. Anya used the moment to pour kerosene in a line along the snow, then touched one of the flares to it. The liquid caught instantly, creating a wall of flame that leaped and danced in the vicious wind. It wouldn't last long, she knew. The cold would consume the fuel quickly, and she'd used almost everything she had. But it gave her time, precious time, to think and to prepare for what came next. She turned to the bison and spoke to them in Russian, in Yakut, in the wordless language of someone who'd spent their whole life around animals. You must run, she told them. When the flames die, you must run toward the valley. Follow the frozen river. The research station is there. They will protect you. The bison stared at her with dark, liquid eyes that seemed to understand more than they should. The eldest female, a massive creature named Nadia whom Anya had helped deliver from her mother 15 years ago, made a low sound deep in her chest. Anya reached out and touched Nadia's forehead, felt the warmth there despite the ungodly cold. Live, she whispered. That's all I ask. Just live. The wall of fire was already dying, the flames shrinking as the kerosene was consumed and the cold pressed in from all sides. The wolves had regrouped, and now they were advancing again, more cautiously but with renewed determination. Anya could see their hunger, could see in their eyes that they'd made their decision. They would attack, and soon. She had one flare left, one final trick to play, and then it would come down to her staff and her will and the question of whether an old woman's determination could stand against the most fundamental law of nature, eat or be eaten. She thought of all the people she'd lost over her 90 years. Her first husband, killed in the war before their son was born. Her second husband, dead of cancer when she was still young enough to believe she'd have forever. Her third husband, who died quietly in his sleep beside her, his hand still holding hers. Her children, taken by disease, by accidents, by the simple cruel randomness of existence. Her friends, her siblings, her parents, all gone now, all waiting for her on the other side of whatever came next. She thought of Katya, beautiful Katya with her whole life ahead of her, and she thought of how her granddaughter would receive the news of what happened here. She didn't want Katya to mourn, didn't want her to feel guilt or regret. She wanted Katya to understand that this was a choice, that everything in Anya's life had led to this moment, and that she wouldn't change a single thing. The lead wolf lunged, and Anya moved faster than she had any right to move at her age. Her staff cracked across its skull, and the beast yelped and fell back. But where one had failed, 3 more took its place. She struck them too, her muscles remembering battles fought decades ago, her body moving on pure instinct and rage. She was screaming now, wordless sounds of defiance that echoed across the frozen plain. The bison behind her were stamping and calling, and she could hear in their voices that they were preparing to run. Good, she thought. Good. Let them run. Let them live. That's all that matters. A wolf's jaws closed on her left arm, and pain exploded.